So there's 10 guys in a room. There's 11 guys in a room. There's 11 guys in a room, and 10 of the 11 are sharing their faith. 10 of the 11 are proclaiming their faith. 10 are saying, Alleluia, Christ is risen. And then the 10 guys look at the 11th guy, and they're waiting for the 11th guy to say, the Lord is risen indeed, Alleluia. But the 11th guy doesn't say that. What the 11th guy says is, I'll believe it when I see it. The 11th guy is Thomas. What's the matter with Thomas? He's in the same room with the other 10, but he's not in the same place as the other 10. Thomas isn't able to believe everything that everyone else in the room believes. Have you ever felt like Thomas? Have you ever felt like you're the only one in the room who has some doubts? We often hear people talk about faith and doubt, not just as if they're two different things, and not just as if they're two opposite things, but as if they're two mutually exclusive things. So that if you have faith, that must mean you have no doubt. Or if you have doubts, that must mean you have no faith. Is that true? Well, if faith is another word for trust, if our faith in God is our trusting God, then what does it mean to doubt? If I doubt somebody, or I have doubts about somebody, I don't altogether trust them. I don't have confidence in them. I don't have faith in them. In that sense, faith and doubt are opposites, but they're not mutually exclusive. I think in most Christians, in fact, I believe in all Christians, even the most faithful people in the room, faith and doubt mingle. The relationship between faith and doubt is a lot like the relationship between courage and fear. Okay, we tend to think of courage and fear as opposites, but the truth is that the only truly courageous person is a person who is truly afraid. Courage isn't what you have when you have no fear. Courage is what you have if you have it only when you're afraid. If you're not afraid, there is no call for courage. When a fireman rushes into a burning building to save the people who are trapped inside, he's either being courageous or he's being fearless. But he can't be both. They're mutually exclusive. Okay, if he's rushing into the burning building because he's fearless, he either believes that fire is harmless or he believes that he is invulnerable. If he's rushing into the building because he's courageous, he believes that fire is deadly and he believes that he is vulnerable. He has a good, strong, healthy fear of fire. But he's not letting his fear stop him from entering the building. That is courage. Courage is not the opposite of fear. Courage is the opposite of cowardice. The courageous person and the coward have a lot in common. They are both afraid. It's just that one is ruled by fear. The other one overrules his fear. It's not that he stops being afraid. It's that he stops allowing his fears to stop him. Faith isn't what you have when your last doubt disappears. Faith is what you exercise when you decide you won't allow your doubts to stop you. We are all in the same room here, but we're not all in the same place. Okay, some of us have little faith. I know some of us have great faith. Some of us have some faith. Some of us feel like we have no faith at all. But the most faithful people in the room will be the first to say that they are people who have plenty of room to grow. The most faithful people in this congregation will say that they have learned to trust God with some things, and that they are learning to trust God with some other things, and that there are some things they don't know how to trust God with yet today. Okay, whether we have a lot of faith or a little, we are, after all, pretty much all in the same place. We all have holes in our faith. Some of those holes are where our fears abide. Some of those holes are where our doubts abide. Christians believe that one day we will all know more than we know today. And that we'll all know more about God than we know today. And that we will all know God better someday than we know him today, because one day, Christians believe, we will all see him face to face. And on that day, our doubts will disappear. And on that day, our faith will disappear, because we won't need it anymore. You know that beautiful poem St. Paul writes about love, that poem we always hear at weddings? It's inside your bulletin on the bottom of page 8. It's the poem St. Paul writes about all the beauties and all the behaviors of love. But Paul begins the poem and ends the poem about love by talking about the limitations of faith. So he begins by saying, if I have great faith, if I have all the faith in the world, if I have faith enough to move a mountain, but have not love, what good is my faith? And then he ends the poem by saying this: now we see through a glass darkly, then we will see face to face. Now I know in part, then I will know fully, even as I am fully known. So then, he writes, these three things endure: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these isn't faith. It's love. Now we see through a glass darkly, while we are living by faith and not by sight. But when we finally see God face to face, then we will live by sight. Now we know only in part, then we will know God fully. Love never ends, the poem says, because God is love. And to know God is to love him. And one day we will know him through and through, just like he knows us through and through. And one day we will love him through and through, just as he loves us through and through. Love is never going to end. But hope? One day, our hopes will pass away, because everything we've been hoping for will have been realized. And faith? Well, one day all our faith will have been vindicated. There will come a day when we no longer need to trust that God is faithful, because we'll know that God is faithful, because we'll see him face to face. Meanwhile, we live by faith and not by sight. Meanwhile, we know only in part, and meanwhile, we have our doubts. Okay? I'm not trying to reconcile us to our doubts, because I don't think God is fully reconciled to our doubts, because our doubts do get between us and him. I think God is interested in overcoming our doubts. I do want to recognize, however, that there is such a thing as honest doubt, and that God recognizes such a thing as honest doubt, and he honors it. How does he respond to Thomas and all his doubts? Does he just wait till Thomas gets over his doubts? No. He goes to Thomas, where Thomas is, and he meets Thomas as he is with all his doubts, and he gives Thomas what Thomas needs to believe, which is something to see. There's another story of the gospel about a man whose son is being tormented by an evil spirit, and the man goes to Jesus and says, Jesus, if you can do something for my son, please do it. And Jesus replies to the man by saying, if? What do you mean, if I can do something for your son? All things are possible for him who believes. To which the man replies by saying, Lord, I believe. Lord, help my unbelief. Can you hear what the man is saying? Lord, I have faith. And Lord, I am full of doubts. Help me. To which Jesus replies with not another word, but he immediately turns to the boy and heals him. And by that very same stroke, he helps the man to believe by giving the man something to see. That man and Thomas are not in the same room, but they are both in the same place. And Jesus meets them each in the very same place, right in the middle of all their doubts. Our doubts do get between us and God, but they do not get between God and us. Our doubts don't stop him. The whole idea that God can't hear a prayer unless it's prayed with perfect faith, or God can't answer a prayer if we have any doubts about a prayer, is ridiculous. It's not biblical. If I can't go to God with all my doubts, what am I supposed to do with my doubts? Am I supposed to make them go away? I can't make them go away. If my doubts will ever go away, it will be because God takes them away. That's what he did for Thomas. That's what he did for the man who asked for help. That's what he will do for us if we allow him. There is such a thing as honest doubt. There is also such a thing as dishonest doubt. And it's related to fear. There are doubts I retain. There are doubts I actually maintain. Because not altogether trusting God suits me. There are doubts I keep about certain things because there are certain things I would like to keep. And if I fully trusted those things to God, God only knows what would happen to my things. If I fully trusted myself to God, God only knows what would happen to me. I'm afraid he might ask me to do some things I don't want to do. I'm afraid he might ask me to stop doing some things I really like doing. I mean, it's funny how some of my deepest doubts about God are kind of stalked by a sort of faith. I'm afraid that if I trust him, he might turn out to be who I'm afraid he is. I'm afraid that if I trust him, he might turn out to be who he says he is, somebody who changes people's lives. I don't know if that suits me. Okay, I call that my doubt. But that's really just me being afraid. My doubts become dishonest when my doubts become excuses. There's another story in the gospel about 13 guys in a room. One of the guys is Jesus, and when Jesus stands up to go to Jerusalem for the last time, everybody else in the room gets scared. Because everybody else in the room realizes by now that Jesus has made so many enemies for himself in Jerusalem that if he goes back to Jerusalem one more time, they're going to kill him. From their point of view, Jerusalem is a burning building. And if Jesus enters the burning building, he will perish. And nobody else in the room wants to see that. Nobody else in the room wants to see Jesus enter the burning building. Nobody in the room wants to enter the burning building with him. Except for one. There's just one guy in the room who's willing to go to Jerusalem with Jesus. And guess who it is? Thomas. If he's going to die, Thomas tells all the other people in the room, then let us go and die with him. Thomas doesn't understand any better than anybody else in the room that Jesus must go to Jerusalem. He doesn't understand that Jesus is entering the burning building in order to save people who are trapped inside the building. Thomas doesn't understand that he himself is one of the souls who is trapped inside the burning building. Thomas doesn't understand that Jesus is going to suffocate the flames with his own body. Thomas doesn't understand any of that. He doesn't know any of that. He doesn't believe any of that. He has no faith that Jesus is going to save anybody. If he has any faith at all, he has faith that this is all a terrible mistake. He's afraid for Jesus and he's afraid for himself, but he doesn't let any of that stop him from following. He has some holes in his faith. He has some doubts. He has honest doubts because he has yet to see. But willing to follow Jesus into Jerusalem with all his doubts, just as later he is willing to join the 10 in that room with all his doubts, Thomas is going to be given something to see. One day we will see, and then we will know. Meanwhile, we live by faith and not by sight. But those who live by faith say that they can see. And I think it's because they are willing to follow. We talk a lot in church about how our faith is tested. When is the last time we put our doubts to the test? When is the last time we tested our doubts to see just how honest they really are? When is the last time we looked to see if Jesus is in the room? I mean, really looked to see where he is and what he's doing and where he's leading. If we're really willing to really look and honestly willing to really follow, we will see.